And in moments like these, the world holds its breath. Two nations bound by history, power, and pride, searching for a way all the way around, sit across the table searching for a path that might prevent tomorrow's headlines from becoming tomorrow's regrets. And this is not just another meeting of leaders. It is a confrontation of visions, a test of trust. And I think that's the same way all the way around, and a gamble with consequences that could reach every corner of our planet. As the doors close and the words unfold, one question rises above all others. Can these two powers find common ground, or will the weight of their differences shape the destiny of us all? Power balance between superpowers, fragile trust, and rising tensions, impact on global security and alliances, diplomatic gambles, hours outcomes, the future of U.S.-Russia relations, the balance of power between superpowers has always been one of the most defining elements in shaping world history. When I think that's the same way all the way around about the United States and Russia, we are not simply discussing two nations with different governments, cultures, and priorities. We are talking about two global giants whose influence extends far beyond their borders, and I think reaching into the economies, militaries, and political structures of nearly every nation on Earth. This balance of power has been fragile for decades, sometimes leaning in favor of one side. And I think that's the same way all the way around, sometimes tipping toward the other, but always holding the potential to determine peace or conflict on a massive scale. It's not just about military arsenals or economic might. It is about the image of strength that each side projects, the perception of dominance that each one seeks to maintain, and then the fear of vulnerability that both sides work tirelessly to conceal. For Russia, power is not only measured in military terms, but also in its ability to assert itself on the global stage, to remind the world that it is not to be sidelined in major decisions. For the United States, that's the same way all the way around. Maintaining power means ensuring that its leadership remains uncontested, that its alliances remain strong, and that its adversaries do not gain too much ground. When these two forces collide in conversation or in conflict, the entire world feels the tension. Smaller nations look to these dialogues for cues about where to stand, how to align, and what the future of their own security may hold. The balance between them sets the tone for international diplomacy, trade, and even technological competition. What makes this balance particularly dangerous is that it is rarely stable. Power, by its very nature, is dynamic. It shifts with the economy, with political leadership, with emerging technologies, and with the alliances that are formed or broken along the way. Well, I think that's the same. Nations know that to appear weak in one domain could mean losing influence in another. This reality pushes them to act aggressively at times and to assert dominance even when dialogue might be the more rational path. And each move on the chessboard of global politics is calculated. And I think that's just for immediate impact, but for the long-term preservation of power. Yet, with every move, the stakes grow higher. The world watches as these two powers test each other's resolve. Sanctions, military buildups, cyber operations, and strategic alliances are all part of this ongoing tug of war. And it is a delicate dance where miscalculation could lead to escalation, and escalation could spiral into consequences that neither side truly desires. But the balance of power is not simply about competition. And that's the same way always around us. It is about survival in a global order where dominance and vulnerability are often separated by the thinnest of margins. In the moments of negotiation, at the high stakes talks we see today, this balance hangs in the air like a fragile thread. One wrong word, one act of defiance, one refusal to compromise, and that thread could snap, sending ripples of instability far beyond Washington or Moscow. This is the weight of power when superpowers meet, fragile trust and rising tensions have become the defining features of the current relationship between Washington and Moscow. Trust, once broken, is never easily restored, and in the case of two global rivals, the fragility of that trust creates a constant undercurrent of suspicion. Every handshake, every public statement, every signed agreement is examined under a microscope. That's the same way all the way around, not just for its literal meaning, but for the hidden intentions that may lie beneath it. The United States questions Russia's motives in nearly every action it takes, and Russia in turn believes that American diplomacy often masks deeper strategic interests. And I think that's the cycle of doubt makes it incredibly difficult for either side to believe that the other is negotiating in good faith. Tensions rise naturally in such an environment. When there is no solid foundation of trust, even small disagreements can escalate into full-blown confrontations. A military exercise near a border, a new round of sanctions, or a critical speech from a leader can ignite suspicion and provoke retaliation. Both nations operate from a mindset shaped by history, decades of Cold War rivalry, proxy conflicts, and espionage that have left deep scars on how they perceive one another. These memories linger, shaping the assumptions and fears that color present-day negotiations. Even when cooperation occurs, such as in arms control talks or counterterrorism efforts, it often feels temporary, fragile, and overshadowed by the expectation that betrayal may come sooner or later. The fragility of trust is further amplified by domestic pressures. Leaders on both sides must appear strong to their citizens, avoiding any sign of weakness in the face of a rival. This political necessity creates a narrow path for diplomacy, and where even gestures of goodwill are criticized at home as signs of compromise or surrender. The result is a constant back and forth of accusations and denials. That's the same way all the way around, with each side digging deeper into its position rather than moving toward genuine understanding. And trust becomes not only difficult to build, but nearly impossible to sustain. Rising tensions are not confined to rhetoric and manifest in military deployments, economic sanctions, cyber campaigns, and competing influence over allies and international institutions. And every action taken by one side is interpreted as an attempt to undermine the other, fueling a cycle of confrontation that leaves little room for dialogue. In this environment, negotiations take on a precarious quality. Words are measured carefully. Promises are doubted before they are even signed. A fragile trust creates fragile diplomacy. Their progress is slow and easily undone by a single misstep. This dynamic places the world on edge. Think that's the same way all the clear powers cannot fully trust one another. The risks extend far beyond their borders. Allies worry about being caught in the crossfire of political disputes, while adversaries may see opportunities to exploit the tension. Fragile trust means that peace is never guaranteed. Rising tensions ensure that conflict is always close at hand. This uneasy balance is what makes the current talks so critical and so dangerous. The impact on global security and alliances is one of the most pressing consequences of strained relations between Washington and Moscow. When two of the world's most powerful nations enter into conflict, if it is only a war of words or a clash of policies, the ripples extend across continents. Global security is not shaped solely by treaties or military capabilities. It is shaped by the perception of stability. When superpowers cannot agree, the rest of the world feels less safe. Uncertainty begins to undermine the systems designed to keep peace. This uncertainty influences markets, fuels arms races, and weakens the confidence that nations place in international institutions meant to prevent escalation. Alliances play a critical role in this fragile ecosystem, and now the United States relies on NATO and a network of partners across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East to project its influence. Russia, though more limited in formal alliances, and I think that's the same way it builds its own sphere of influence through strategic partnerships with nations that challenge the Western order. When tensions rise between Washington and Moscow, these alliances are tested. And I think that's the same with the countries aligned with either side are forced to strengthen their commitments, prepare for possible confrontation, and in some cases choose between neutrality and loyalty. This creates a polarization of global politics where cooperation becomes harder to achieve because so many nations are pressured into taking sides. I think that's the same way all the way around. Global security is further threatened by the way mistrust between the superpowers trickles down into regional conflicts and fair-weight areas such as Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. Washington and Moscow often back opposing factions, and this not only prolongs conflicts but also transforms them into proxy struggles where local disputes become arenas for global competition. The consequences are devastating for civilians in those regions, and the possibility of small-scale conflicts spiraling into larger confrontations increases with every passing year. The fragility of global security is magnified when two superpowers treat smaller conflicts as pieces on a chessboard rather than as human crises requiring cooperation. In addition to conventional military concerns, the competition between Washington and Moscow extends into new domains such as cybersecurity, space, and advanced weaponry, and each new advancement is viewed not as progress for humanity, but as a potential threat to balance. This mentality fuels a race where innovation is guided more by fear than by collaboration, and creating technologies that could destabilize security even further. And I think that's the same way all the way around. The absence of trust between the two nations makes it nearly impossible to establish reliable frameworks for managing these new challenges, leaving the world vulnerable to accidents, miscalculations, or outright aggression. The state of alliances and global security ultimately depends on whether the superpowers can recognize that their rivalry, if unchecked, threatens everyone. As long as tensions remain unresolved, the possibility of cooperation in addressing global issues like climate change, terrorism, or nuclear proliferation diminishes. Allies grow anxious, adversaries grow bold. That's the same way all around, and the international order built over decades begins to erode. When Washington and Moscow fail to find common ground, global security itself stands on unsteady footing, and alliances everywhere brace for the unpredictable consequences of that instability. Diplomatic gambles versus dangerous outcomes define the razor's edge on which superpower negotiations often stand, diplomacy at its core. And I think that's the same way all the way around, risk-taking about stepping into uncertain territory with the hope of achieving stability or advantage. But when it comes to Washington and Moscow, those risks are amplified by the stakes involved. Every conversation, every agreement, that's the same for the way around, and every concession carries not only the possibility of progress, but also the looming shadow of failure that could escalate into something far more dangerous. The gamble is that dialogue can prevent conflict. The danger is that mistrust, misinterpretation, same way all the way around, or manipulation can turn the attempted peace into the very trigger of confrontation. And I think that's the same way that is on both sides. Understand that diplomacy is not simply the exchange of polite words across a table. It is a chess game where every move is carefully calculated and every gesture is scrutinized for hidden meaning. And the United States engaging in talks with Russia can be seen as both an opportunity and a liability. Offer too much, and allies may question the strength of Washington's leadership. offer too little, and Moscow may escalate its pressure to force concessions. Russia faces the same dilemma. By engaging with the U.S., and risks being perceived as conceding to Western influence. Yet refusing to engage could isolate it further and deepen sanctions or military pushback. Both nations gamble because neither wants to appear weak, but both know that failure could lead to destabilization far beyond their borders. The danger of these diplomatic gambles is not confined to the negotiating table. Words spoken in private meetings ripple outward, influencing military strategies, economic policies, and alliances. A misstep in communication could be misinterpreted as provocation. A promise not fulfilled could be viewed as betrayal. In such an environment, even the act of sitting down together carries risks. This fragile situation creates a paradox. Diplomacy is the only path to prevent conflict. It is also the arena where the seeds of future conflict can be sown if talks collapse. The gambles versus danger dynamic is heightened by the fact that both sides often used diplomacy as a tool of strategy rather than a genuine pursuit of resolution. Talks can be used to buy time, to test the resolve of the other side, or to signal strength to domestic and international audiences. And I think that's the same way the strategic maneuvering means that agreements reached may lack durability if they were born from tactical advantage rather than genuine trust. The danger is that when these fragile deals inevitably unravel, the disappointment and anger on both sides can push the superpowers closer to open hostility than they were before the talks began. Similarly, diplomatic gambles between Washington and Moscow remind the world that dialogue is never neutral. It is a game played under immense pressure, where every word could tip the balance toward peace or catastrophe. The hope is that through calculated risks, a fragile peace can be maintained. The danger, however, is that one wrong move could unleash consequences that neither side can control, reshaping global security in ways that would haunt generations. The future of U.S.-Russia relations is one of the most uncertain questions in global politics. For decades, the dynamic between Washington and Moscow has swung between fragile cooperation and intense confrontation and a favor of fully settling into stability. Today, that uncertainty is sharper than ever, and as both nations stand at a crossroads where the choices they make could define the trajectory of international affairs for generations. The path ahead is filled with competing possibilities, moments of dialogue that could reduce tensions, and the flashpoints of conflict that could plunge the world into deeper instability. The future is not predetermined, but it is shaped by the actions and decisions of leaders who understand that their moves affect not only their own people, but the security and prosperity of the entire world. One possible future is one of cautious cooperation, where both nations recognize that prolonged hostility drains resources, weakens alliances, and threatens global stability. In this scenario, the United States and Russia might find areas of common interest: arms control, counterterrorism, climate change, or the regulation of emerging technologies. While mistrust would never vanish completely, both sides could learn to manage their rivalry within agreed limits, reducing the risk of accidental escalation. And I think that's the same way all the way around. Such a path would not bring friendship, but could not predictability, which is often the foundation of peace. When another future is defined by confrontation, where diplomacy fails to bridge divides and competition intensifies on every front, this path is far more dangerous as it opens the door to escalating military buildups, proxy conflicts, and economic warfare. in such a future, as a both nation would be drawn deeper into the rivalry. And I think that's creating a polarized world where cooperation on global challenges becomes nearly impossible. The danger here lies not only in deliberate conflict, but in the possibility of miscalculation. Two nuclear powers locked in distrust could stumble into disaster through a single misunderstanding or misstep, and I think aim to find a way around, with consequences that would reverberate far beyond their borders. Between these two extremes lies the most likely future. Then this way, one of uneasy coexistence. Washington and Moscow may neither fully cooperate nor fully clash, instead navigating a complex mix of competition and limited collaboration. I think that's the same way all the way around. This would mean a world where tensions remain high, but where leaders, aware of the costs of outright conflict, choose to keep their disputes within controlled limits. Such a future is neither stable nor secure, but it may be the most realistic outcome given the deep mistrust that defines the relationship. Ultimately, I think the future of U.S.-Russia relations depends on whether both sides can recognize the weight of their responsibility. They are not merely adversaries fighting for influence. I think that's the same way all the way around. They are custodians of a global order whose collapse would affect billions, whether through cooperation, confrontation, or uneasy balance. A vast choices will determine whether the next decades are marked by progress toward peace or under the shadow of conflict. The world watches closely, knowing that the decisions made today could shape the destiny of tomorrow. As the world watches all the way around, two nations sit across from one another, their words carrying the weight of history and the hopes of tomorrow. Washington and Moscow, and bound together by rivalry yet chained to the same responsibility not just to their own people. I think that's the same way all the way around. That depends on their restraint, their choices, their willingness to step back from the edge. The truth is simple, though the path is not. Peace is fragile, trust is uncertain, and power is dangerous when unchecked. Within every fragile moment lies an opportunity. An opportunity to choose dialogue over destruction, and to seek understanding over suspicion, and to remember that humanity's future will not be written by missiles or sanctions. I think that's the same way all the way around, but by the courage to rise above fear. The destiny of these two nations may shape the course of the world, but the hope for tomorrow lies in their ability to find common ground today. And so we wait, we watch, and we hope that the voices raised in power will choose the wisdom of peace before the silence of conflict consumes us all.